Immigration and IRCA, 1986 to 2000. So let's review some terminology so that we're clear on the language that we use. Illegal alien is the official legal term that appears in much of our policy and in our laws. However, we may also encounter the term illegal immigration or immigrant, undocumented immigration or undocumented immigrant, unauthorized immigration or an authorized immigrant, or people might be described as being without papers or out of status. In general, it's preferable not to use the term illegal as a noun to describe people. Public concern over illegal immigration increased dramatically during the 1970s and 1980s as the laws became more restrictive and people were entering the country without authorization. And this concern focused primarily on Mexican and Latin American immigrants and on the U.S.-Mexico border, although there were undocumented or unauthorized immigrants coming from other places as well. So what makes immigration illegal? In the case of people coming from Latin America or the Western Hemisphere, it's the universal quotas of 20,000 entrants per country per year, regardless of country size or demand for migration, that makes people out of status or unauthorized as entrants to the country. And these quotas are applied to countries regardless of the population or the number of people that might be wanting to come. So we can think about countries like Mexico, which has about 100 million, compared to a country like Denmark, which has about 5 million people, Belgium, or even smaller countries like Guatemala. Now, countries with the highest demand for migration, such as Mexico, China, and India, were generally more disadvantaged by these kinds of universal quotas that appear to be fair and equitable, however, do not take into account the different levels of immigration demand. Thus, these quotas make legal migration from these countries with the highest number of potential migrants extremely difficult. In 1986, Congress finally passed an Immigration Reform and Control Act, known more popularly as IRCA. And IRCA did a number of things. First, it established for the very first time employer sanctions for knowingly hiring illegal or unauthorized immigrants. Along with that, it established the I-9 form, the form that we all fill out in the United States when we want to obtain employment. So this required employers to verify that someone had the legal right or authorization to work in the U.S. But how did employers get around this? A couple of different ways. First, some employers would accept fraudulent documents, whether knowingly or not. But secondly, some employers would subcontract. So they would hire a cleaning company, for example, that would hire the workers, thereby making themselves not liable for verifying the status of the workers who are doing different kinds of jobs for them. The 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act also did a number of other things. It increased funding and resources for the Border Patrol and gave the president the authority to declare a quote-unquote immigration emergency. But perhaps most surprising in IRCA was the provision that offered amnesty for those immigrants in the United States who could prove that they had been working here at least 5 years. Many observers at the time were rather surprised that President Ronald Reagan would have signed such seemingly liberal immigration policy, but others have observed that, in fact, this was really a political compromise that he had to make in the context of the Iran-Contra scandal that was also happening simultaneously. So as a result of the 1986 law, approximately 3 million unauthorized immigrants became legal U.S. residents. Approximately 2.6 million of them were people from Latin America. But 10 years later, the 1996 Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act did some different things. For the first time, this law denied services to legal immigrants, meaning that even those who were here in the country legally could not apply for social service programs. So one of the consequences of this was that from 1994 to 1997, citizenship applications to the INS tripled from 543,000 to approximately 1.4 million. In other words, people were interested in becoming citizens, not just remaining permanent residents, because of the restrictions being placed on them by that 1996 law. So this was one of the contributing factors, as well as new dual citizenship options that were appearing in Latin America, and the effects of California's Proposition 187, another very punitive anti-immigrant law that appeared in California in the mid-1990s. So let's discuss some of the facts about the issue of illegal immigration in the late 20th and early 21st century. We know that approximately 75% of legal immigrants come to join a close family member, and that's as a result of our immigration policies that favor family reunification. Of approximately 1.4 million immigrants who entered the U.S. in 2002, for example, 25%, we believe, entered without authorization. Although we believe that, or we have the impression that most undocumented immigrants come from Mexico, only 52% of them actually come from that country. Another 15% come from Central America, 11% from South America and the Caribbean, and the rest from other nations around the world. In other words, undocumented immigrants come from many countries: Ireland, Bulgaria, Poland, Russia, and China. In addition, many people are surprised to learn that only about 40% of unauthorized or illegal immigration comes across the U.S.-Mexico border. In fact, another 40% actually consists of people who overstay business, tourist, or student visas. And as probably the most prominent scholars of immigration in the late 20th and early 21st century, Jorge Duran and Douglas Massey, have pointed out, the contradiction between stricter borders and the liberalization of trade or free trade throughout the hemisphere and the world has actually contributed to increasing the dynamics of illegal immigration. They point out that increased enforcement at the border, for example, has had the unintended consequence of leading more people to stay in the United States once they arrive here. This helps to explain why the numbers of undocumented immigrants grew so dramatically from the mid-1990s to the 2000s. Now, if we look at deportations in the last several decades, we can see that these numbers have increased very dramatically in these years. Prior to the mid-1990s, the United States deported around tens of thousands of people each year. From the mid-90s to the 2000s, this increased dramatically to hundreds of thousands of people being removed from the country each year. And in 2011 to 2012, for example, approximately 400,000 people were deported. In our last unit, we'll wrap up with some final points to consider.